there's this idea of education, an old idea of education, and frankly, it's a British idea, that the arguments that made the curriculum or that made truths, made academic truths, have all taken place in the faculty rooms and people arguing and scholars and historians. And then all that is made into a final product. The curtain is closed on that messy making, that messy argumentation. And what gets revealed to the student is a been there, done that, finished rightness that you then write down and recapitulate on an exam, and you get your degree. And what modern poetry does and what ModPo celebrates is the stuff that messy making that's behind, and what Gertrude Stein is all about. I mean, she should be our pedagogical hero. She should be the figure of many, but she's principal here, the figure who's teaching us that the messy making is the point, that the messy making, that the pieces and the mechanisms are what is to be learned.
My response to Stein is that luckily for me, I think, unlike Sharon, I've never really tried to understand Stein. I've just kind of entered into reading her and enjoying her as you have, Sharon. But the thing for me that I think I now most enjoy about her work, and the long dress poem is a really good example of this, is that by making language really kind of strange, and particularly in the objects section of Tender Buttons, language that kind of circles around the things of the world. What her poetry does for me is that it reveals the kind of liveliness and the energy of things in the world. So the current in the factory is a kind of non-human agency that I think her poetry sort of reveals really well. That might be weird, but that's kind of what I really enjoy about her.
Thank you so much. I wanted to go to Erica Kaufman a few minutes ago. Back when we were talking, I was making large claims about pedagogy and Stein. So, Erica, do you mind saying a word or two about how Stein informs your thinking about pedagogy and education?
I teach Stein all the time, and it's super, super, super fun because she's so strange and alarming to students. But then once you're not worried about getting the right answer or the right interpretation, everything changes.
I just want to pick up this last line, and I want to turn to Davy and Gabe on this. The last line, so think about what Patty just said about how much fun she has and how much she doesn't care what we think or what readers think or what Picasso thinks. And then we get that last line, Davy and Gabe, let me recite what history teaches. History teaches. We've been talking about teaching, so this is sort of a setup. But Gabe, you want to try first? This is a hard line, but it kind of clinches things. And meantime, will you, Jeremy, go over to Georgia? Yeah. So, Gabe, what do you think about that last line? Let me recite what history teaches. History teaches. Is that part of the don't give a damn?
I think a lot of things. What I want to say is I think it shouldn't be thought of too much of a twist. Like, I think there's a way of reading it in which it seems like this very sudden instance of a statement away from the language of the rest of the poem that has a very specific meaning, is like deep and like affecting and very serious. I think that there's a way of looking at it in the same way as you would look at something like If I Told Him If Napoleon, where it has a kind of it has a like platitude to it, like it's history teaches, like, you know, the lessons that history teaches, these are very common expressions. And I think in a way Gertrude Stein is still having like a bit of fun with it. However, there's an aspect to which history and like historical terms come into this poem in an important way, like the presence of Napoleon, other than Napoleon just happening to rhyme with If I Told Him.
It does kind of rhyme.
I think there's a way in which it's like, I'm not 1,000% sure really what I feel about it, but there's a way in which it does both, of being like a kind of silly blabber in the way that a lot of it is, and a sudden like dark thing at the end.
Yeah. Okay. I want to pick some of those points up, but let's go to Davey next. History teaches. let me recite what history teaches. History teaches. Davy, is it a stretch to
For me,
link? Is it a stretch to link this to the stuff we've been talking about pedagogy?
I don't think so. And I think that the reason that it doesn't feel like a stretch to me is all of the work the poem does to think about sequence and the impossibility of sequence, to think about all the work that First does, where First is purposefully anti-sequential. There's not a second. It's not a linear progression. It's really refusing the idea of having a progression, of having what Josh was talking about in terms of an educational experience, where you learn this part, and then you learn this part, and then you learn this part, and then you figured it out. And so if you're moving through non-sequential space, you expect to get to the end and find the opposite of arrival. So if you're like, it's like the line is like the opposite of a final exam, in that here are all these fractal parts that have fit together. Some of what Maurice was saying about it being a kind of cubist process, with the understanding that like the mode of putting knowledge together is a non-sequential process, is necessarily a fragmentary process.
Which puts the lie to history. I mean, I'm making an extreme statement, and I didn't mean to draw you there, but she's saying fuck history, right? Who comes first? Napoleon the First. Well, there was a Napoleon the Third. That was not the same as Napoleon the First. I mean, and they just took, well, Napoleon was actually named Napoleon, but Napoleon the Third was not originally named Napoleon. He just took the name because he wanted to be related to Napoleon the First. Talk about arbitrary. That's my French history.
I'm learning to be a teacher at this fabulous place called the English and Media Centre, where their pedagogy is very much, you have to deconstruct things in order to teach it. So this week I've made an advert, a commercial out of a Midsummer Night's Dream, and I've made a film poster from an Alice Walker short story, The Flowers. So, this is the kind of learning that I'm learning to teach. And as you said, that what Stein is doing is deconstructing in order to show you something in a new way, that kind of all just slotted into place beautifully. So
do you think you would dare to bring any of this stuff into your classroom?
With 11-year-old British kids? Maybe.